Before we begin the video, there are going to be heavy spoilers for CLAIR OBSCUR Expedition 33. I'm currently sitting at around 60 hours of in-game time with Expedition 33, and outside of a few minor complaints, mostly geared towards some of the optional platforming sections, I think this will be the front runner for Game of the Year. And I'm confident in saying this because GTA 6 was delayed until May 2026, and I believe real competition will come from Silksong if it actually comes out this year, Ghosts of Yotei, and Metroid Prime 4. There might be a few surprises between now and the end of the year, but as it stands right now, I believe that Expedition 33 is the Game of the Year. So if you were to just complete the main campaign, which can take you roughly 30 to 50 hours depending on the difficulty, you're going to experience one of the best original RPGs in years. The narrative is fantastic, and in my opinion, the writing found here feels perfectly balanced. You're going to be laughing 1 second and then traumatized the next because there's a twist that you more than likely weren't anticipating. The dialogue found in Expedition 33 is phenomenal, especially the comedic bits. The conversations between Minoko and Verso are a real highlight, and seeing them interact with each other is a lot of fun. I really enjoy seeing Minoko just be purely terrified of Golgra, especially you have two different cutscenes with it. I think there's one where if you go back to the village when you're trying to visit Noko and you talk to Golgra and Minoko's trying to talk her down, it essentially shows him like acting confident and then backing down. And then the first time you go to the Sacred River and you see Minoko really like bulk up and talk trash to Golgra and then turns to Verso and goes, "Please help me." That is fantastic. I think that every single character in the main party is interesting and layered, and I believe that Renoir is a compelling antagonist and one that I found myself empathizing with. The environments found in this game are some of the most creative I've ever seen. It's a true dark fantasy epic, and once you're able to fully navigate the canvas with a fully unlocked SK, you will find some areas that are going to probably surprise you. I mean, there's casinos and beaches, churches, and many more, and right now it's probably one of my favorite overworlds in gaming. I was just shocked by the area diversity and the fact that the overworld has a number of vertical locations. It's just really surprising because I think when you're first going through the map, you're just kind of making your way around. You're not looking up or down because you don't really have a need to. But then you start flying and it's like, where are all these locations coming from? And you can just kind of land on a certain floating island and then it's just like a location to a boss fight, or it goes off into like this random conversation that you're going to find. It's all really well done. The turn-based combat in Expedition 33 is fantastic, and I totally understand that there are people out there who will not be comfortable with parrying. I get it. I fall into that boat. It can be really intimidating given the amount of damage characters can receive if you miss. But the reward for perfectly parrying a combo string can really help you turn the tide in most fights. Now, you don't need to parry to beat the main campaign, but for some optional bosses like Clea, the only way to win is to parry, because otherwise you aren't doing enough damage, and if you aren't interrupting her chroma, she will heal to full health. And I spent, I think, 40 minutes in this fight trying to figure that out, because once I got midway and felt like I was in a good groove, she was throwing brand new enemies at me, so I had to adapt to those combo strings and watch her heal for like 500,000 every time. But I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy this combat system so much, because while you should learn the mechanics and are rewarded for doing so, the game does allow you to get through a number of different fights by dodging and committing to your party's individual kit. So you don't have to perfectly parry all the time. It's just certain fights you gotta kind of flex a little bit. Being able to figure out effective combos and teams is a ton of fun and can make each encounter engaging. It's a really fun combat system, and while it isn't anything revolutionary, for some reason I just kept thinking back to Lost Odyssey. I am hoping that the popularity of Expedition 33 forces developers to take more creative risks and make turn-based combat engaging. In my opinion, the biggest highlight as it pertains to combat are the boss fights. This game does an excellent job of scaling in complexity as you progress through the campaign. The fight against the Paintress was just phenomenal, because the second phase includes her ripping open the canvas to fire projectiles at you, and the first time I saw this, My jaw dropped. I literally stopped what I was doing and became very distracted because of how cool it was, and this ended up getting my first unit wiped. Luckily, my second unit is comprised of Minoko and Mael, who I really feel are great as anchors. One, because Mael does a ton of damage, and two, because Minoko has really high survivability. Plus, he has a really diverse kit because of all the monster feat you can collect throughout the game. The fact that you can actually use bosses in this is pretty insane, and I just love the fact that Minoko does so much damage while also being able to shield, rush, and heal. He's like the perfect all-around character if you set up his kit correctly. And I don't know about anybody else, but every time I got into a fight using Minoko, I am hitting Almighty constantly. And the amount of damage if you have Almighty up is insane. I love Minoko. When you just take the core experience of Expedition 33, you are getting more than enough quality content for a quote-unquote AA title, which, by the way, makes it feel like I'm stealing from the developer because you are getting a complete experience for less than full price. This is also not taking in all the side content found in this game, in which there is a lot, and the bulk of the side content adds depth to the characters and the world you inhabit. It's all pretty good, and in case of the various gestural beaches and challenges, it's all really funny. I love the fact that there are so many parkour challenges, and I don't know how they get up there because they're so goofy looking, but it's just a really, really good time, and I'm just kind of shocked that there's so much to do in this game, and that I only paid $50 for it. Now, it's not a perfect game. I do think the emphasis on cinematic gameplay can be distracting in certain fights. The different camera angles can make it difficult to time dodges and parries, and I believe there were some encounters where I was heavily relying on audio cues. I mentioned that the platforming sections can be a bit wonky. I found the hidden painter studio and was really annoyed about how I would roll after a jump even though the distance between platforms wasn't that high, and this would lead me to fall off the map and start over at the beginning. It just was not fun. While I believe the cinematic camera angles and the flashy effects during fights are legitimate gripes as the combat requires you to be precise, it didn't kill my enjoyment. I just had to squint during some fights to ensure that I wasn't getting murdered during a 6 to 7 hit combo. The platforming, in which most of it is optional, is a minor gripe, but beyond those two complaints, I didn't have any major issues with this game. There are just so many different things to praise the developers for when it comes to this game, but I do believe, though, that the one thing this game absolutely nails, and this is just my opinion, and it's why I hold this game in such high regard and why I believe it's so great, is the way it handles its central theme of grief. I'm usually a skeptic when a game, regardless of its genre, has mature themes, because there are far too many examples where a game will jump ship during its campaign for more hopeful and less believable waters. There's nothing wrong with this, though, as long as it's earned, but far too often, there's a Deus Ex moment. There's that plot armor moment where, even under the most dire circumstances, somehow characters come out unscathed, and sometimes even better than when you eventually found them. It can be completely unrealistic and can take away from the impact of certain moments during the plot. In the case of Expedition 33, this rarely happens because while there are a number of humorous moments found throughout, when this game starts to dive deep into its central theme of grief, it does not relent. The beginning of this game sets a tone, and the acts that follow can be particularly devastating. Every character that makes up this world is scarred because of this conflict with the Paintress, and when you get to the final act and it's determined that the world you're inhabiting is a product of the real Verso, you then realize that this war of the canvas is the family's inability to come to terms with their loss. Renoir is not just the central antagonist, he's a grieving father desperately trying to save his family. The Paintress, Aline, isn't just this monolithic creature, she is a grieving mother trying to hold on to the last bit of her son's soul. Alicia is the guilt-ridden younger sister whose naivety led her to trusting a rival faction that led to her brother's death, and Clea, who appears cold and standoffish in her rare appearances, is in reality a grieving sister who is completely focused on revenge. You do learn more about her in her optional arena and boss battle, and just like the rest of the family, she's having a difficult time coping. She states that she both loves and hates what Verso did because that's who he was. Clea, in her limited appearance, comes off as a very believable character. This family was torn apart by a tragedy. Instead of coming to terms with the loss of a loved one, they instead entered Verso's canvas and began this conflict that twisted and distorted the world that he created and loved. I really feel like there are no villains here. Because if you're listening to Renoir's final plea to Alicia, he just wants her to be okay, even though he knows that leaving her in the canvas will eventually kill her like it almost did her mother. He just wants her to find peace. The two endings found in Expedition 33 are equally devastating. If you side with Alicia, then you've enabled her, as you learn that what Renoir and Verso were warning about in regard to the canvas eventually killing her because it was absorbing her chroma was true. That image of Verso turning and looking at Alicia's face as you see the paint start to give way, and it shows that Alicia is clearly dying from being overexposed to chroma. And that final image of Alicia is haunting because Alicia had come to terms with the fact that she wanted to die in this alternate reality rather than face her pain and face the truth. It's tragic because Renoir and Verso were right. And it's even worse because you know that Renoir tried his best to get Alicia to leave, but he left her there because he knew that there was more than likely no convincing her, and that if she didn't leave on her own accord, then more than likely she was lost. I call this the personified Maruki ending because you accept the alternate reality free of pain and suffering, even though there's more than likely one or two characters that know the truth. I really wonder if the party knows that they're living in this fake world, that all of this is just made up and make-believe. You know Verso sees it, so I wonder if this happens to become the canon ending. Are we going to get DLC in which we see Alicia become the antagonist and Verso goes out and tries to convince her through all these different actions? I would love to see that. I think it would be really cool because this game is selling like hotcakes right now, and I would love to see something like that in this game. You know what? Even if it's not the canon ending, why don't you just give it to me, Sandfall? That'd be great. I do think, though, that this ending with Alicia is incredibly unfair to the remnant of Verso, who you happen to encounter frequently throughout the game. And this kid just wants to stop painting. And like every time you see him, he's like, do I have to paint? Do I have to do this? And then you see him at the end, he's like, I just want to stop. And you're like, damn, maybe we should really have this guy rest. And I think that the second ending, as it comes with the destruction of the alternate Lumiere and the loss of your friends, that's a really difficult decision to make, but I ultimately think it's the right one because this family needs to face their grief head on and work toward healing. And I really empathize with Renoir during his final plea because the loss of one child would make any family go mad with grief and it would splinter them. And the loss of another child would more than likely kill them. Especially when you know that there is something that can be done, that you can actually take action to help guide them on the right path, but instead you leave them to their own devices knowing that they're not in the right mental state, would more than likely completely fracture this family for good with that loss. Regardless of the ending you choose, I have to commend the developers because there are so many moments in which they could have fumbled this, in which they could have thrown in a Deus Ex moment, but they didn't. The fact that you learn that Verso let Gustav die, that's a really eye-opening moment. That's when I kind of knew, while playing through this game, that the developers were on to something, that the writers were committed to sticking with this central theme of grief, to finding kind of these extreme ways to get people to snap out of it and face reality. And I really applaud that because most games would probably turn around and find some out, but they never do. Once Alicia found out that she was a paintress, I fully expected Gustav to return. I expected him to make his triumphant return to the party. I think there was going to be, 2 teams of 3. 5 felt like a really odd number for an RPG. That never happens. He stays dead. The fact that it's such an odd number to look at, 5, knowing that there's potentially a 6th slot, and instead you just keep at that number and never bring Gustav back, that is a fantastic move because that hole never gets filled. Even with Verso there, he comes off as a ghost at times. And he is. But you feel the impact of Gustav's loss throughout the entire game. And I think that's fantastic. And I applaud Sandfall Interactive for sticking with their guns. Because while they could have easily been like, all right, man, let's peel it back a little bit. Let's be a little more happy. That type of stuff. None of that happens. Every single dialogue that comes through with Alicia when she fights herself has it come off that she is just absolutely caught up in trying to save this world and live in it, knowing that it's going to kill her, knowing that she is going to gaslight Renoir and Verso the entire time and try to convince them that I'm going to be okay, which is completely not true. And I just kept expecting that moment's going to fall through. Yeah, we're going to get this moment where Verso convinces her or Renoir convinces her. None of that happens. I expected Claire to come through in the clutch, or Aline. Nothing. I was very shocked when nothing happened. And I was very pleasantly surprised that the developers were willing to give you two endings that essentially forced you to make decisions that would, one, do irreparable harm to Alicia, and two, completely eliminate the world that you had spent so much time in. It's a bold decision, and I fully expected something to give, but it didn't. And I think that's what really separates Expedition 33 from other games. Sandfall Interactive deserves their flowers for handling the central theme of grief in a very grounded and believable way. They just happen to utilize dark fantasy as a vehicle to convey it. Now you combine this with the other core components that make up CLAIR OBSCUR Expedition 33, and you don't just get one of the best games of 2025, you get one of the best experiences. A AA title that provides a AAA experience is always worthy of Game of the Year consideration, and if this game happens to get an expansion, DLC, or sequel in some way, I'm going to be the first one to sign up for it. And if it just happens to be another $50 game, I'm going to be very upset because it's clear that this should be a full price title. And I think a lot of people would not mind paying full price for an experience like this. As an aside, if there happens to be DLC, and let's say it doesn't really matter what ending is canon, you know what I'd like to know? What was the fight between Clea and the Riders like? Maybe that should be the sequel to this. Maybe we should see how Clea dealt with her anger and her rage and her grief when she was trying to focus on that war. Because I think that would be a very interesting conflict to explore, and I really want to see what this world has to offer. But let me know what you think, because that's going to do it for this video. And if you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.